Hey, Terry Caliendo from Dedicated Managers here again, and today on the exciting world of Terry's amazing updates, boy, I should write stuff before I actually start talking. Today I want to talk about making my list of kinship caregivers real time. So right now, or previously, I've shown the real-time database where I can have two of the same entity open in two different browsers. This browser on the right could be somewhere else in the world on some other computer. Right now they're on the same computer just for demonstration purposes. But if I make a change in one, if I change Irma to Irma, that change gets dropped over here. And I have a little bit of a delay so that as a person types, I did this in another video, I think, so that it doesn't send the update right away, so I'm not calling a database call for every type, but it waits till the person is done typing, and then you can see some action happens, and then the update happens. So that is the live database from entity to entity. But if my store, or if the other user is on the list of caregivers, so we would call this the list of entities, and when I click on this to go into the entity, that's the actual entity I'm looking at. So this is my dashboard where I list all the various entities. So I want to see that when I make a change here, I want that update to be broadcast and shown here in my list. So right now, if I was to make a change on this last name, Barthale, I would like to see that change over here. Let's see what happens. Right now I'll change it to just Bart. And you see that the change does not show up over here. So they're actually listening to the same entity, so you saw something go on here, but this list is not updated. So let's take a look at the code and try and figure out what's going on and what we can do to change that. This is the code here, and this function right here, it's in my store, and when that dashboard object is called, I can actually pull that up and show it. So here's the dashboard. When the dashboard route is called, it basically dispatches that function on the store. Here's the store dispatch get primary kinship caregivers. So it calls this function, and this function right here is what reaches out to the Firestore and gets the information for this array. Which loops out and shows all the different names of the documents. So it's actually calling the same document that's shown here. It's calling it here, and then it's calling it here to get this guy's name and this guy's name, and then it's just showing a short list of them. But it's doing it separately the way I have it currently set up. So let's look at that function that does that. And here's the call right here. So this is where we go out to the Firestore, and we first set up the collection. So we say, hey, on the collection, primary kinship caregiver, which is where all my data is stored for all my entities, all my primary kinship caregivers. And then I want to order by last name. I want to limit to 30 so that when there's thousands, I don't get 1,000 results and do 1,000 queries. Also note that I have not implemented pagination, as everybody likes to apparently call it on the internet in every video I've seen. I must be from Wisconsin, or I am from Wisconsin, and I would call it pagination. I must be just not as well educated or have the right accent. Anyway, I'll try and work on saying pagination. I'm not doing any pagination, so right now, if there were 300 entities, I could only see the first 30, and I couldn't see the rest of them because I don't have any buttons or anything to change my query. That will come in the future. But anyway, I'm calling this static get, and I'll talk about the documentation in a second of what this get is. But I'm calling this static get that then returns a promise and then calls my callback function. And my callback function takes this query snapshot, which is the list of all the entities that are in this limit, the collection list that's returned. And I basically take that query snapshot, I loop over it with a for each, and then that returns the individual document. And so I take that document, I get its data from the data function, I put it into an array based on that document, that same document object, the ID, which is the ID of the data. So basically I go out, I call this collection and I say, hey, get me a bunch of results, and then I pass them through this for each function, and I take each result and I put it on an array, and array by its document ID. So that array then ultimately in the dashboard gets looped over. That's going to be this. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but that's what this is doing. Is it's going over each of the entities in that array and displaying them. So that's wrong one. Oops. I'm causing problems here. Okay, I closed my browser, so I had to come back. I think I was talking about this array here. This array is what holds all my different documents that I went out and got to show in my list, and so that is this right here. This array is then looped over to show all of these different entities in a short form, and then I can click on one of them and go in and see the details of that particular entity. So the question is, how do I make this dynamic? Currently, this is a one-shot call, and so we saw before that if I make a change, it does not get updated real time. And it's actually pretty simple to get to how to make it dynamic. And I just want to walk through how to do that because I struggled with the documentation a little bit. So I just wanted to walk through and help, help if you're trying to learn. Teach, it's the whole teach a bird to swim, no, a bird to fish, no, teach a man to fish, yeah, something like that. So trying to be funny, and I'm terrible at it. I don't talk enough in life. I spend my whole life in front of a keyboard. So how do we get there? Let's start right here. So on the Firestore, we call the collection, and we get the primary kinship caregiver. So I'm actually making this call, and this collection call returns a collection reference. So if we go to the documentation and look at the reference section, so I'm on the Firebase website, I'm in the docs, I'm looking at the reference section, and I am in the JavaScript library as opposed to the Android library. I've been in there before and screwed myself up. Make sure you're in the right reference section because the functions are a little bit different for each one. So we are looking for the collection reference that is returned by that call. So again, this portion right here up to here returns a collection reference. So the question is, what can we do with a collection reference? Well, let's see. We can do a bunch of things. We can add a document if we send some data to it, to the add parameter. Same with the document. We can make some changes to a document. We can limit our query and that has to do with this right here, the order by, the start at, all that stuff. It affects our the results that are returned by shrinking them down or limiting them in some way, or ordering them. So here, order by, I'm ordering by last name, and then I'm also limiting it to 30 results, so that if I have 3,000 results, I don't get too many. And I'm totally blanking on whether or not I've recorded this a couple times, so I'm going to say it again. I apologize if it's a repeat. I could have 3,000 things returned here, 3,000 documents returned or references to those documents. And so I'm limiting it to 30, and I have no pagination going on here, or pagination, depending on what part of the country you're from, apparently. This is stuck. This is stuck at 30. And so if I had 3,000, I could only look at the first 30 ordered by last name. So obviously I need to implement something that allows me to change the query, and that'll come later. But right now, so that's this stuff right here, and these guys return a snapshot query object. Well, I'll look at what they return in a second. Well, actually, no, let's do that. So I can call, ultimately I call limit, and you can see limit returns a query object. So that last limit, the Firebase, turns out order by returns a query object, and then limit returns a query object. It's basically a query object can keep returning a query object. If we take a look at the query here, so this returns a query, and so my query then has all the same functions, the end at, the end before, all the things that let me make changes to the ordering or the amount. So also the that this query that's returned, this query object that is returned, also has the get and the onSnapshot calls, and that's what we're ultimately doing. Is after that query we do a get call, and that get call is the static call, and onSnapshot is the one that has a listener that listens for changes. So first I want to point out that I'm in the query right now, and I'm on Snapshot here. If I go to the where was it? The collection reference. Notice that the collection reference also has get and onSnapshot, and they are the same thing. So they both get to do the same thing, and they both return a query snapshot. So get returns a query snapshot after a promise. So it's a promise that will be resolved with the results of the query. So if I go back to my code and I look, here's my get call, and then a promise, you call a then on to give it a function that's called when it's complete, when the asynchronous activity is complete. That's what a promise is. Not going to get totally into that. So we pass it this function here, which says, hey, here's what I want you to do after you go and get my query. Here's my function to give me that query snapshot, and then I'm going to do a bunch of things with it. And that's where I think I talked about this. Like I said, I've recorded this a bunch of times, so I'm blanking on what I've actually said already. So I'll just say it again briefly. That returns it calls my function and passes the query snapshot object, and then I loop over that query snapshot and take each document, put it in an array to be displayed here on the front end, and then each when I display it, I call its first name and last name to show this short code, this short list of the entities. So that's what I'm doing here. That is static again, and now I need to make it dynamic. So the trick to making it dynamic is that they both, because the get returns a query snapshot and onSnapshot returns a query snapshot, it doesn't return it. You have to pass it a function similar. Rather than returning a promise, you just pass it the actual function to be called each time the snapshot changes. There's a change in what you're listening to. You send it as a function directly to, rather than waiting for the promise. So here's all I have to do is go into my code, and I just take this function here that I put in the promise. So I'm going to Control X and get rid of that function. I'm going to change get to onSnapshot, and then I will comment out this stuff because it's no longer returning a promise. And now in the call to onSnapshot, I'm going to paste that function that I had before. So it's the same thing. It receives the same thing, the same query snapshot, and everything is the same inside, except now I'm going to call this function. It's hard to highlight it, but I'm going to call this function every time something changes. So now I am dynamic. So it's just going to replace this every time something changes. I'm just going to replace this array with the new data that's in the query. So if we take a look here at my database now, bum-ba-da-bum, this should be dynamic. Now I might need to reload, so I'm going to reload to make sure things hopefully work. I'll go into Bart Irarama, and I'll change Bart back to Bart, H-O-L-M-E-A-U, I guess. And you see that it's updating live now on the right side. So I'm basically, anytime a change comes through, I'm listening for changes now. And anytime they come through, I dynamically update by just replacing. I'm really replacing the whole thing. You just don't see anything happen. You just see the change. But ultimately, I'm redoing this entire view. But that gets into Vue and how I could optimize that better. But really, there's really no toll with this small amount of data in just updating the whole thing. So now my I'm real time again. It doesn't update until the user stops typing for about a second, and then you'll see the updates go through. So that makes it live. And now I want to talk about real quick, do a little extended feature here, a little bonus material, and show in the console what's happening. Because the, wow, I don't know if you just heard that bang, but a bird just flew into my window. So let's take a look at what happens here. Let's get the consoles open on both inspectors. And so when I make a change to Bartholomew, and let's get back to the console, let's clear this so that we can see. So I'm just going to make a single change. You can see I do some stuff over here, and then some stuff loads over here. And basically, in my code, what I'm doing is every time I call this onSnapshot function, I log the snapshot, and then I log the doc changes, so we can start to talk about how I would more appropriately show something deleted. So let's take a look. Actually, before I do that, before I go back, let's show that. So I've got this entity here, and if I wanted to delete this entity and have it smoothly transition, watch, I'm going to delete this entity, and it's going to just disappear over here. Everything's going to be real drastic. So I'll hit delete, and I'll do confirm delete, and it flops, it changes real fast. There's no transition the way, that when I switch from here to here. When I load something or when I go back, you see that transition. There's usually, this should slide up to disappear as opposed to totally disappearing. And I also want to show in the Firestore. So let me load up the Firestore here. Let's go to my console. And let's just wait for this to load. Let's get into my clients database here. Look at the database, the Firestore. And so let's take a look at what, if I go to here and I show my different entities, let's watch what Firebase does. Firebase has a listener on these entities in their front end. And when I delete an entity, it flashes over here. It flashes red, and then it disappears. And this right here is me doing something else in another. It just flipped windows because an alert came up in this window because it disappeared. But we saw that it flashed red and disappeared. And so when I delete something, it just goes away. I don't give any indication that it has deleted. It just immediately goes away. So I need to do a better transition. And how would I do that? Well, that's to start to learn about what's happening. So now let's go back to where I go into the entity, and I'll make an update. And so if I change, Jones Zeta to just to Joan, I guess, we saw some updates happen over here. It updated real time. And just to go back again to what I was talking about, we should see the query snapshot and then the changes on that query snapshot in that listener call. So I made the change over here, and then some things happened over here. And this is that first query snapshot that was called. That's my first thing that I log out. And it shows me the documents. There's only one right now. If there were more, if I had 3 or 4, it would show all the different ones. But it's got the number of documents in my query and the changes, or the query snapshot for that document. So then next I look at that query snapshot, and then I show the doc.changes. And so the doc.changes, that's this. This is the array. And so this array shows me my changes, and it just shows modified right now. Let me go and add a couple more entities because it'll be more interesting if I have a couple entities. So let me go back to the beginning. Let's add a new client. First name, Dave, Devav, Davidson, David Dunn, and then add another client. So Marty Martinson. So now let's go back to, or let's clear these. So I'll make a change to, I'm on Marty, so I'll make a change to Marty, and we'll just change him to Marty Martin. So that change happened over here, and then we see that all the clean things that happened. Here's that query snapshot that's first shown, which basically tells us the whole query again. Or I can look at the changes and see what happened. So we can see that the only thing that changed was that the old index of 1, which was, I guess it's 0, 1. So Marty Martinson changed to, it was modified. So if I go back to, let me clear this and go back here because I wanted to make it more interesting. So let's go into Marty and let's delete Marty. So now, if I go back here, here's my query snapshot, which is the same thing that I received at the beginning. This time, I removed an object, I guess. It didn't tell me that, I thought it would tell me that these changed positions. So the new index is -1, meaning it's gone because it was removed. You can't have a new index on something that's gone, so they make it -1. The old index was 1. Now I should have received some info, I would think, on that this one changed places too, but it didn't. So I was getting that before, so I'm a little confused there. Just going to gloss over that and forget about it for now. And then what do I do next? So then I still loop over the entities and I console log out the documents. But anyway, this information right here is what tells me what's removed. So it tells me that the old index of 1 was removed. So in my code, when I loop over this, so I come back in here, before I update my array by going over the query snapshot, I can look at the changes. I can find the index of the, where is it? I can find the index that was changed, so then I can do something on that index. So rather than rewriting the index, I can actually up here, do something on the changes, do a loop on the changes array, and delete the index array before calling this. And so I can make it look nice, where I can have that delete do that flashing thing that the Firebase store did, where it flashed before it disappeared. So that's where I do that. I'll probably do that in the feature. I know that's pretty abstract and you don't fully understand, but I'm just trying to point you in the direction of what's showing and where to go. So that's the changes, and that's the location to go. So I'll try and do some more updates, but hopefully that was understandable. My dog was barking and birds were flying into the window and my son was screaming, so I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I've said. Hopefully it was somewhat understandable and you learned something. Hopefully you learned something about the documentation. I've spent a lot of time just trying to go over all the different paths and what things return, and hopefully you learned a little bit about how to step through, starting with your collection reference and going to something like the, if you do an NDAT call, what does it return? It returns a query. So then you go to the query object, and then the query object, most things within the query object return a query, but you also get to do your get call that returns that query snapshot, or your onSnapshot call that also returns the snapshot but as a listener. That was everything that I just showed. And so what can you do with a query snapshot? This is all that stuff. And my method that I do is the for each on that query snapshot. So that's, I'm doing the onSnapshot. It sends a query snapshot each time this function is called, which is anytime there's a change, it calls the query snapshot, which that's where I am now. I'm in the reference query snapshot, and then I get that for each function. So that's this for each function right here that I then loop over to get my documents. So you can see how you can trace through the the references. Once the guides only help you so far, and then you got to figure out how to do things on your own, and that's where you got to start coming to the reference section to figure out what functions you have and what you can do. So the one thing I did want to talk about was the doc changes. This was frustrating for me, that if you call this doc changes, it returns an array of the document changes, but it doesn't tell me what that object is. And so I had to find out through through my list, through my outputs here. I had to. So of course my son just walked in the room and completely distracted me. I don't know what I was talking about. I was talking about these doc changes. Sorry for the intermittency of this video. Anyway, this doc changes that's called. So that's when I do here. I call this query snapshot. I can call the doc changes function on it. But what does that return? It doesn't really tell you what it returns. It tells you it returns an array of document changes, but where is the documentation on that? And that turns out to be this document change object. So I wish they would put that in the documentation. I'll probably complain on the boards and say that should be added here, unless I'm missing it somewhere. But this array of document changes is actually an array of document change objects, which now you can see here's my new index, my old index, the type of change, add, modified, or removed. So that's what I'm seeing in my code here. When I show that array, I'm seeing the document, the new index, the old index, and type. So that's what's being shown in the code here. So that's how you can get through and figure out. So now I can take my document change, so I can loop over that array that's passed back of these things, and I can do the different things. I can call the look at the old index that it was at, and if it was a delete, then I can delete it from the old index with some fancy CSS or whatever. Beautify my front end gives me a way to make that look pretty, and I'll talk about that in another video. So anyway, I've gone on forever, 28 minutes, time to make dinner for my son. Time to stop talking. I'm losing my voice, and I'm actually confusing myself. So if you're not totally confused, leave a comment in the comments section. Let me know if the video was helpful. Again, I try to be short, but I end up talking too much. But hopefully longer is better than shorter, so that I can explain things more and be more clear. But just haven't bored everybody to death, or anybody, if anybody ever actually ends up watching this. If you want to collaborate, feel free to contact me. Terry at dedicatedmanagers.com is my email address, or www.dedicatedmanagers.com. That's my website. Feel free to visit me, we can would love to have you collaborate and maybe work together at some point. So anyway, 30 minutes, pretty good job on my part. My voice is done. Take care, have a great day, and as I always say, happy coding.